Every promise you have ever broken to yourself has a neurological explanation, and it has nothing to do with willpower. Your brain is not lazy. It is loyal to the patterns you have repeated most often, regardless of whether those patterns serve you or destroy you. Let that settle. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. Modern neuroscience has now confirmed it. What you call your personality is simply a collection of habits your brain automated to save energy. And here is the truth that changes everything. You are not stuck with the mind you have. You are stuck with the habits you keep. This audiobook is not about feeling motivated. It is about manual rewiring. 7 specific daily habits. Each one targets a different neural pathway. Each one backed by behavioral science and the quiet discipline of history's most extraordinary minds. Not through dramatic life changes, not through positive thinking, just through repetition, the only force that has ever permanently changed a human brain. 7 habits, applied consistently, one day at a time, starting now. Chapter 1. The Morning Architecture. You have given the most powerful hours of your mind to the world before you have even opened your eyes. That is the first habit to break. The first 30 minutes of your day do not just set the tone. They train the brain to operate in a specific mode for the following 16 hours. People who design their morning are not more disciplined than you. They have simply understood one thing that most people never see. The morning is the only time of day that belongs entirely to you before the world begins making its demands. The moment you check a phone before your feet touch the floor, you have handed your best mental hours to someone else's agenda. A notification, a headline, someone else's crisis, someone else's opinion. Before your first conscious breath of intention, your nervous system has already been pulled into reactive mode. And reactive mode is a neurological state, not a metaphor. Research published in the journal Psychophysiology describes the cortisol awakening response, a 30 to 40% spike in cortisol that occurs in the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. This cortisol spike is not random. It is your brain's chemical invitation to set the pattern for the day. Whatever you engage with during that window receives amplified neurological weight. Whatever you avoid during that window is marked by your nervous system as low priority. This is why the morning architecture matters so much. It is not a productivity trick. It is a window of neurobiological leverage that closes quickly. The architecture has 3 elements: stillness before stimulation, a single clear intention spoken silently or written down, and one act of physical activation. That is the entire structure. It does not need to take 90 minutes. It does not need candles, journals, or meditation apps. It needs intention, sequence, and repetition. The stillness piece comes first because it protects the most valuable neurological resource you possess: unstimulated attention. The moment external input enters, your brain begins organizing around that input rather than around your own priorities. The single intention piece comes second because it gives the day a target. Without intention, the day is just a series of reactions that happen to you. With intention, you have a rudder. The physical activation comes third because the body is the fastest available switch for shifting nervous system state. A short walk, 10 push-ups, cold water on the face, anything that tells the nervous system the day has begun, and you are the one running it. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and commander of the largest military force in the world, began each day with a private written meditation before any advisor, general, or messenger was admitted to his presence. His meditations, never intended for publication, reveal a man who designed his mental state before entering a world that demanded his constant attention and decision. He wrote, "Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, uncharitable men, but I know their nature. He did not design his morning out of luxury. He designed it because he understood that an emperor who entered the day reactively was an emperor who would be controlled by circumstance. The same principle applies to you. You are not managing an empire, but you are managing the only thing that matters more, your own mind. I learned this the hard way. There was a period in my life where I woke, checked email before brushing my teeth, and walked into work already behind. I thought I was being diligent. I was actually training my brain to begin every day as a responder, rather than as a director. The cost of that small habit was not visible on any single day. It compounded across years. A morning routine does not need to be long to be effective. Consistency of structure matters infinitely more than duration or complexity. A 3-minute architecture practiced daily for 60 days produces more neural change than a 45-minute architecture practiced twice and abandoned. This is where most people stop. They build a beautiful morning routine they cannot sustain, and then they decide they are not disciplined enough for morning architecture. They never understood that the discipline was in the consistency, not the grandeur. Every intentional morning is a vote cast for the person you are building. Same chair, same light, same sequence, same intention, repeated often enough that it becomes the foundation rather than the experiment. Chapter 2. The Single Focus Protocol. Your attention is the most valuable resource you own, and you have been training yourself to scatter it like loose change. Focus is not a personality trait. It is not something you either have or do not have. It is a skill trained by repetition and destroyed by constant switching. In a world deliberately designed to fragment attention, the ability to hold deep focus on one thing for an extended period has become one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive capabilities a person can develop. The science behind this is settled. Sophie Leroy, a business professor at the University of Washington, published research in the Academy of Management journal describing what she called attentional residue. When you switch from one task to another, a portion of your cognitive resources remains emotionally and mentally entangled with the previous task. That residue does not vanish in a moment. It lingers, reducing the quality of your attention on the new task for up to 20 minutes after each switch. Multiply that residue across the dozens of switches you make in a typical morning, and you arrive at midday with withered cognitive flexibility. You are not tired. You are residue saturated. The world's most valuable work, the kind that produces real progress, is almost always produced in states of uninterrupted, deep focus. This is not a philosophical claim. It is a measurable pattern across disciplines. Carl Jung retreated to a stone tower in Bollingen, Switzerland, to do his most important psychological work. Darwin took long, isolated walks away from his home to think without interruption. Mark Twain wrote in a cabin so removed from his family house that his family had to blow a horn to call him in for meals. These were not eccentric personalities. They were systems built around one understanding. The work that matters cannot be done in the fragments of attention left over after the world has taken its share. You must protect the deep hours. Cal Newport, a computer scientist and author who has spent 2 decades studying productive knowledge work, coined the term deep work to describe this exact capability. He works in strict focus blocks and does not use social media. His books, which have sold millions of copies and changed how countless professionals structure their days, were written inside those protected blocks. The single focus protocol is simple. One protected period of complete attention daily, even if only 25 minutes, that trains the focus muscle consistently. You choose one task. You close every tab, every notification, every door. You set a timer. You work on that single task until the timer ends. You do not respond to anything. You do not multitask. You do not reward yourself with a quick scroll between paragraphs. Environmental design is the foundation. You cannot rely on willpower alone to resist a distraction-saturated environment. The phone must be in another room. The workspace must be visually quiet. The notifications must be off, not merely silenced. Silenced notifications still invite attention. Off notifications do not. Protecting focus is a form of self-respect. It is the message you send your own brain when you choose deep work over reactive attention. Every deep focus block tells your nervous system that some hours of your day are sacred, that they belong to the work that matters, that your attention is not a commodity for sale to whoever pushed the loudest notification. The truth is that most people do not even know what deep focus feels like anymore, because they have not experienced it in years. They have confused being busy with being productive. They have mistaken the feeling of constant activity for the feeling of meaningful progress. A single 25-minute focus block, practiced daily for 60 days, will restore something you may not even realize you have lost: the capacity to do one thing, completely, from beginning to end, for a sustained period. This is where most people stop. They start a focus block, get interrupted, decide the experiment failed, and return to reactive attention as the default. They never gave the protocol enough repetitions to build the neurological infrastructure that makes focus feel natural. When the focus block becomes the daily default, rather than the occasional experiment, you have crossed the threshold from effort to architecture. You have stopped performing discipline and started living inside a system that produces the discipline for you. Chapter 3. The Discomfort Ritual. You have been treating comfort as the goal and difficulty as the threat to be avoided. That single orientation is rebuilding your mind in exactly the wrong direction. Comfort is not the enemy of happiness. It is the enemy of growth, resilience, and the self-belief that comes only from discovering you can handle more than you thought. When you choose discomfort deliberately, you stop being someone who is ambushed by difficulty and start being someone who trains for it. The neurological basis here is specific and measurable. Studies of amygdala response, including work by Wendy Mendes at the University of California, San Francisco, have shown that voluntary exposure to challenging experiences reduces the amygdala's threat response over time. The amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, calibrates itself based on what you repeatedly expose it to. If your daily life contains only soft, comfortable, predictable inputs, your amygdala stays primed. It fires easily. It overreacts to small difficulties. It treats ordinary setbacks as emergencies. If your daily life contains deliberate, voluntary, structured difficulty, your amygdala recalibrates. It learns that difficulty is not a signal of collapse. It learns that you have trained for this. This is what genuine mental toughness is. Not performed confidence, not emotional numbness. A nervous system that has been trained, through repetition, to remain steady in the presence of difficulty. The discomfort ritual is not about punishment. The distinction between suffering and stretching matters enormously. Suffering is what happens to you. Stretching is what you choose. The discomfort ritual must stretch you slightly beyond your current comfort zone, but it must not destroy you. This is training, not performance. What counts as one hard thing? It can be physical, such as a cold shower or a hard workout when you do not feel like it. It can be emotional, such as having the conversation you have been postponing. It can be cognitive, such as doing the most difficult task first, rather than the easiest. It can be social, such as saying the uncomfortable truth instead of the polite lie. The form matters less than the orientation. You are voting, daily, for a personality that does not run from difficulty. Doing the hard thing first transforms the psychological texture of every subsequent hour. Once you have voluntarily chosen a difficult action at the start of the day, your nervous system carries a quiet marker of capability. The rest of the day becomes slightly easier to navigate. This is not a metaphor. Researchers who study cortisol patterns and stress inoculation have documented what is sometimes called the stress priming effect. Controlled stress exposure earlier in the day blunts the impact of later, less controllable stresses. Jocko Willink, retired Navy SEAL commander, wakes at 4:30 every morning, not because it is required, but because choosing difficulty before the world demands anything from him sets the psychological tone for everything that follows. He describes this as ownership, the decision to take control of the day's first difficulty before the day assigns one to you. The Stoic philosopher Seneca practiced voluntary discomfort deliberately. He occasionally chose to eat simple food, sleep on a hard surface, or wear inadequate clothing, not from poverty, but from discipline. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself all the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" He was training his nervous system to know that it could survive what it feared. That training made everything else easier. I learnt this the hard way. The first time I held an ice cube in my hand for a full minute, I was certain I would lose the ability to think clearly. I did not. The second time was easier. By the 20th time, the practice had become a kind of ritual stabilizer, a daily vote that I was someone who could meet difficulty rather than flee it. The identity shift that happens when discomfort becomes a daily choice rather than an occasional ambush is enormous. You stop being the person who waits to feel confident and then acts. You become the person who acts first and discovers confidence on the other side of the action. That ordering difference rewires how the brain organizes around challenge forever. This is where most people stop. They confuse occasional hardship with the discomfort habit. They had one hard week and concluded that they had trained. They did not. They had a sample. Training is repetition. Chapter 4. The Creation Practice. Your brain changes more from producing than from consuming, and you have built your days around consumption. Creation activates cognitive systems that passive input leaves entirely dormant. In a world that makes consuming effortless and creation slightly uncomfortable, the daily practice of making something, however small, is one of the most powerful rewiring habits available. The neuroscience here is consistent and well documented. Producing output activates the prefrontal cortex, builds neural pathways for discipline and problem solving, and releases dopamine through effort rather than through passive reward. Anders Ericsson, the researcher whose work on deliberate practice shaped modern understanding of expertise, observed that the cognitive systems activated by creation are qualitatively different from those activated by passive input. The brain used in making something is not the brain used in receiving something. When you consume all day and produce nothing, you are running your cognitive system in the lowest gear. Consumption without creation produces a specific kind of mental fog. You have experienced it. A day spent scrolling, reading, watching, listening. You end the day feeling full of input, but empty of output. Your mind is crowded with other people's ideas and absent your own. The brain is flooded with input, but never given the opportunity to process, organize, and express. That imbalance is not neutral. It produces a quiet frustration, a sense of static, an inability to locate your own thoughts amid the noise of everyone else's. Creation is the antidote. What creation looks like in practice. It does not require artistic talent, large blocks of time, or public output. It requires producing something that did not exist before in your mind at the start of the day. A paragraph of writing, a drawing, a designed spreadsheet, a meal cooked from scratch, a short piece of code, a workout plan written out rather than copied, a conversation that produced a new idea rather than recycled an old one. The output is real, but the scale is small. The scale is small on purpose, small enough to repeat daily. small enough to make the identity of creator feel attainable rather than aspirational. The consumption limit is the natural partner to the creation habit. Setting a deliberate boundary on passive input frees the attention that creation requires. You do not need to quit every form of input. You need to ensure that input is not crowding out output. The most powerful version of this is to make creation the first consumer activity of the day, or to schedule it at the time of day when your cognitive energy is highest. Daily creation builds the creator identity that motivates every other habit. Once you have spent 30 days producing something small each day, you no longer experience yourself primarily as a passive recipient of the world. You experience yourself as someone who shapes the world. That identity is not motivational slogan language. It is a self-conceptual shift that changes how you make decisions across every domain. Benjamin Franklin, printer, inventor, diplomat, and one of the most productive minds in American history, structured his entire life around creation. He woke each morning and asked himself one question: what good shall I do today? He did not ask what he would read, watch, or consume. He asked what he would build. He wrote, printed, experimented, and created something new every single day of his working life. Austin Kleon, author of Steal Like an Artist, has written that the creative habit is less about talent and more about showing up to make something every day, regardless of how it turns out. The output is not the point, the practice is the point. Repeated daily, the practice rewires the brain to think like a creator rather than a consumer. The truth is that creativity is not a rare gift reserved for artists. It is the natural output of a brain that has been trained to produce rather than only receive. Anyone can develop it. Almost no one develops it because they have confused consumption with productivity and never installed the daily habit that produces the difference. This is where most people stop. They admire creators from a distance. They consume the creator's work and call it inspiration. They do not realize that what they are admiring is a daily practice, not a personality trait. They never build the practice themselves. Chapter 5. The Body-Mind System. You have been treating your thinking as if it were housed in a machine that does not require maintenance. That orientation will cost you years of capability. Your mental state is not separate from your physical state. It is a product of it. The brain runs on a body, and the quality of your thinking, your emotional stability, your focus, and your resilience are all directly affected by the physical condition you bring to each day. Movement is not optional for a strong mind. It is its foundation. The research on this is among the most robust in all of cognitive science. Physical exercise increases production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein often called miracle grow for the brain. BDNF stimulates neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons, and strengthens the neural connections responsible for memory, learning, and emotional regulation. A landmark review by Fernando Gomez-Pinilla, published in Nature Neuroscience, summarized the evidence that exercise produces measurable cognitive gains. Movement is not a lifestyle preference. It is a structural input to the organ you think with. Even brief movement, a 10-minute walk, produces measurable improvements in cognitive performance and mood for up to 4 hours afterward. This has been documented in multiple controlled studies of working memory, attention, and executive function. You do not need a marathon. You do not need an hour-long training session. You need a daily practice that produces this biochemical shift reliably. The minimum effective dose is the right starting point. How to build the body-mind habit without requiring a gym membership, a specific fitness level, or large blocks of time. A short daily session, performed at the same time daily, with enough intensity to elevate heart rate and engage the major muscle groups. Walking is sufficient. Body weight training is sufficient. Swimming is sufficient. The specific form is less important than the consistency. Movement as emotional regulation is one of the most underrated tools for mental control. Changing physical state is the fastest available method for changing emotional state. When you are flooded with anxiety, anger, or stagnation, moving the body produces a measurable neurochemical shift within minutes. This is not because movement magically solves the problem producing the emotion. It is because the nervous system is one integrated system, and changing one element of that system changes the rest. You cannot fully separate how you feel from what you have done with your body that day. The identity of someone who moves daily versus someone who waits to feel motivated before moving is the gap that compounds dramatically over years. The mover does not wait for permission. The mover does not negotiate with their mood. The mover has installed the habit as infrastructure. The wait for motivation person is still negotiating every morning. They have not installed anything. They are still running on willpower and intention, which is the most unreliable fuel a person can run on. Aristotle taught philosophy while walking. His school of philosophy in Athens was called the Peripatetic School, from the Greek word for walking. He understood that the mind functioned differently in motion than in stillness, and he structured his entire teaching practice around that insight. 2,000 years later, Stanford researchers confirmed what Aristotle practiced. Merrilee Opezzo and Daniel Schwartz published a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, Learning, Memory, and Cognition, finding that walking increases creative output by an average of 60% in participants. Steve Jobs was famous for conducting important meetings on long walks rather than around conference tables. He believed that physical movement unlocked a quality of thinking that sitting in a chair never accessed. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking. The habit is ancient. The neuroscience is modern. The practice is available to anyone with a pair of shoes. The truth is that the body and mind are not two separate entities competing for time. They are one system. Every choice you make for the body is a choice you make for the mind. Every day you skip movement is a day you underinvest in the organ you are depending on for everything else. This is where most people stop. They have heard that exercise is good for the brain. They nod. They do not build the daily habit. They keep their body and mind in separate compartments, and they wonder why their thinking never reaches the sharpness they know is possible. Chapter 6. The Reflection Discipline. You have been moving through your days so quickly that you have stopped examining the direction you are moving in. Reflection is not navel-gazing. It is the act of examining your own thinking so you can direct it rather than be dragged by it. Most people are not leading their thoughts. Their thoughts are leading them, and they do not even notice because they never stop long enough to observe the pattern. Unexamined thoughts and emotions accumulate into the patterns that drive most of our decisions without our awareness or consent. This is not metaphorical. Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist behind the somatic marker hypothesis, demonstrated through decades of research that emotional and cognitive processes are integrated and that unexamined emotional patterns drive automatic decision-making more powerfully than conscious logic. The implication is uncomfortable. Without reflection, you are running decisions through patterns you have never examined, on autopilot, with limited awareness of why you are making the choices you make. The 3 reflection questions unlock clarity. What am I avoiding? What do I need? What am I ready to release? The first question exposes the avoidance patterns driving your days. You will always find something you are running from. The second question exposes the genuine needs behind your surface frustrations. The third question creates permission to let go of obligations, identities, resentments, and beliefs that no longer serve you. None of these questions can be answered while you are moving. They require stillness. Why journaling works neurologically. The act of translating experience into language engages the prefrontal cortex, which reduces emotional reactivity and increases capacity for deliberate choice. James Pennebaker, a psychologist at the University of Texas, has published research showing that brief structured writing about emotional experiences produces measurable improvements in physical health, immune function, and emotional regulation. You are not journaling because it is therapeutic. You are journaling because it shifts your brain into the mode where deliberate choice becomes possible. The weekly pattern review is where the deepest leverage lives. Reading your own entries from the previous week reveals recurring triggers, recurring fears, recurring beliefs that daily life moves too fast to expose. You see the same pattern repeating across multiple days. You name it, you interrupt it. That is reflection converting into direction. You cannot do that without a written record of what you have been doing. Reflection as self-leadership. You cannot direct yourself from within a storm you have never examined. The leadership skill is the willingness to step outside the storm long enough to see its structure. Without reflection, you are inside the storm forever. With reflection, you are inside the storm most of the time, and outside of it often enough to make choices the storm would otherwise make for you. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal his entire adult life that was never intended to be read by anyone else. It was a daily practice of examining his own thinking, questioning his assumptions, and calling himself back to his principles when he had drifted. The journal we know as Meditations was not a philosophical treatise. It was one man talking to himself to stay aligned. Charles Darwin kept meticulous daily notebooks, not just of scientific observations, but of his own thinking processes, the doubts, the wrong turns, and the gradual development of ideas across years. What we see in his published work is the polished outcome of reflection that happened in private across decades. Both men understood the same truth. You cannot know where you are going if you never stop to examine where you are. I learnt this the hard way. I spent the first decade of my career running at full speed without ever sitting down long enough to ask whether the direction made any sense. The clarity I assumed I lacked was not a function of intelligence. It was a function of never having built the quiet practice that produces clarity in the first place. This is where most people stop. They feel their minds growing noisier as the years pass, and they assume the noise is the natural state. They never build the reflection discipline. They never discover that the noise was a choice they were making every day by refusing to look inward. Chapter 7. The Consistency Code. You have been treating consistency as a perfection standard rather than as an attendance standard, and the perfection standard has been killing your habits for years. Consistency is not what most people think it is. It is not showing up at full intensity every single day. It is never going fully absent. The minimum version of a habit, done daily, produces more lasting neural change than the perfect version done occasionally. And the moment you understand this, perfectionism loses its power over you entirely. The neuroscience of repetition settles the question. Neural pathways are strengthened through frequency of activation rather than intensity. A small daily activation, repeated over months, builds a thicker neural pathway than an intense activation, repeated over days and abandoned. This is why marathon bursts of effort, followed by collapse, produce almost no lasting change. The neural pathway never gets enough repetition to thicken into infrastructure. It gets enough activation to register as novel, then atrophy from disuse. Daily small practice builds the infrastructure that occasional large practice never does. The minimum viable habit. What is the simplest possible version of each habit that still counts as showing up? This becomes the floor, not the ceiling. For the morning architecture, the floor might be sitting up, taking 3 breaths, stating one intention, and washing your face. 2 minutes. For the single focus block, the floor might be 25 minutes of phone away, 1 task, no notifications. For the discomfort ritual, the floor might be taking a cold shower, for 30 seconds. For the creation practice, the floor might be writing one sentence. For the body-mind system, the floor might be a 10-minute walk. For the reflection discipline, the floor might be writing one line about what you felt today. For the consistency code itself, the floor is the system, not the habits. The 2-day rule. Never miss 2 days in a row. 1 missed day is a rest. 2 missed days is the beginning of an abandoned habit. This is one of the most powerful consistency tools anyone can install because it cuts the all-or-nothing thinking that kills most habit work. You are no longer negotiating with yourself about whether today's version is good enough. You are only negotiating about whether you will show up at all. Showing up imperfectly maintains the neural pathway. Showing up perfectly or not at all does not. Self-forgiveness is a consistency tool. Guilt and shame about missed days produce the all-or-nothing thinking that kills habits more reliably than any other force. When you skip a day and then skip another because the first skip produced shame, you have converted one missed day into the abandonment of the entire habit. Forgiveness breaks the conversion. You missed one day, you showed up the next day. The habit continues, the path thickens. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, describes the British cycling team's use of the aggregation of marginal gains. The team improved every single element of their performance by 1%. The wheels were rubbed with alcohol to improve grip. Surgeons were consulted on hand washing to reduce illness. Riders were taught the best way to sleep. Each improvement was tiny. The compound effect across hundreds of small gains was so dramatic that the British cycling team went on to dominate international competition for years after winning almost nothing for a century. This is consistency applied as a philosophy. Not one dramatic improvement, but 1,000 small ones, maintained without interruption long enough for the compound effect to become undeniable. The identity that consistency builds over time is the deepest reward of all. The most powerful thing you can become is someone who keeps their promises to themselves. That identity is not built by perfect streaks. It is built by daily returns, by showing up on the hard days, by forgiving the misses and continuing, by treating consistency as a long game rather than a short performance. The truth is that perfection is the enemy of consistency, and consistency is the engine of every lasting change in your life. This is where most people stop. They treat one missed day as evidence that the habit does not work for them. They never understood that the missing, not the doing, was building the only thing that matters. Chapter 8. Why habits are the architecture of your identity. You have been treating habits as performance tools rather than as identity machinery, and that misunderstanding has been sabotaging your results for years. The 7 habits in this audiobook are not productivity tools. They are identity-building mechanisms. Every time you repeat a behavior, you are casting a vote for the kind of person you are becoming, and over time, enough votes in the same direction change not just what you do, but who you fundamentally believe yourself to be. Habits work neurologically through a loop that researchers, including Wendy Wood of Duke University, have spent decades documenting. The loop has 3 parts: cue, routine, and reward. The cue triggers the brain to initiate the behavior automatically. The routine is the behavior itself. The reward is the neurological payoff that teaches the brain to associate the cue with the routine. Repeating this loop thickens the neural pathway that connects cue to routine until the behavior runs with minimal conscious effort. Once a habit is fully installed, you do not choose it anymore. You execute it. Choosing is what new behaviors require. Executing is what installed behaviors feel like. The transition from choosing to executing is the moment behavior becomes identity. The identity-behavior feedback loop is the deeper mechanism. Behaviors reinforce identity, and identity reinforces behavior. When you complete a meditation practice, you cast a vote for being a person who meditates. When you cast enough votes in the same direction, your self-concept updates. You are now a person who meditates. And once that identity is installed, the meditation is no longer a behavior you choose. It is a behavior that aligns with who you are. The behavior reinforces the identity, and the identity reinforces the behavior. That loop is the engine of long-term change. Breaking poor habits requires changing the identity narrative first. Most people try to change a behavior while leaving the identity intact. They tell themselves they are someone who is trying to stop overeating. The identity is still someone who overeats. The behavior fights the identity, and the identity wins every time. The structural approach is to change the identity first, then let the behavior follow. Decide who you are, then do what that person does. The behavior gets much easier once the identity is in place. Motivation is the wrong foundation for habit building. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings fluctuate. Identity is a belief, and beliefs are far more stable. A motivation-based habit depends on feeling motivated. A feeling-based system collapses when the feeling disappears. Identity-based habits depend on who you are. Who you are survives the feeling disappearing. That is why the architectural approach to habits matters. It is not what is convenient today. It is what you are building regardless of what is convenient today. The cumulative identity shift is the result you are building toward. 60 days of these 7 habits together would alter not just your daily behavior, but your fundamental self-concept. You would no longer experience yourself as a person attempting to be disciplined. You would experience yourself as a person who is disciplined. You would not experience yourself as someone who is trying to think clearly. You would experience yourself as someone whose thinking is clear because of how they live. Aristotle wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. This was not inspiration, it was neurological fact, expressed 2,000 years before the science confirmed it. The repetition is the mechanism, the identity is the outcome. Viktor Frankl survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He had everything external stripped from him: freedom, family, physical safety, material possessions. What he discovered, and later described in Man's Search for Meaning, was that the one thing that could never be taken from any human being was the choice of how to respond to circumstances. He observed that the prisoners who maintained internal disciplines, small daily practices of meaning-making, reflection, and dignity, survived not just physically, but psychologically, in ways that those who abandoned all structure did not. His survival was not luck. It was the product of habits of mind maintained under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Habits are not conveniences for comfortable times. They are the architecture of your identity in every condition. The truth is that you do not need more discipline to change your habits. You need to understand what your current habits are doing to your identity, and then to redirect them until the identity follows. This is where most people stop. They want to change their habits without changing their identity, and they cannot understand why the change never sticks. The change never sticks because they never change the underlying vote they are casting about who they are. Chapter 9. How these 7 habits work together as a complete system. You have heard the 7 habits as 7 separate practices. They are not 7 separate practices. They are one operating system. Each habit produces benefits in isolation, but the real transformation happens when they are practiced together, because each habit amplifies the others. The compound effect is what makes a system more powerful than a list. Consistent small improvements in multiple areas produce non-linear results because the improvements multiply rather than add. A 1% improvement in morning architecture, a 1% improvement in focus, a 1% improvement in discomfort tolerance, multiplied across the same day, produces not a 7% change, but something closer to compounding exponential change. This is why the British cycling team's aggregation of marginal gains worked. Not because any gain was dramatic in isolation, but because hundreds of small gains multiplied into something unprecedented. The 7 habits form a complete daily cycle. Morning architecture sets the intention. The single focus block produces output during the most protected cognitive window. The discomfort ritual builds the resilience that makes all subsequent challenges of the day less threatening. The creation practice builds the identity that turns productivity into purpose. Movement provides the energy that makes consistency less effortful. Reflection builds the clarity that keeps the day's direction from drifting. Consistency ties everything together so the cycle repeats without losing momentum. Morning architecture creates the space for focus. Without an intentional morning, the focus block becomes one more item on an already crowded cognitive agenda. With the morning architecture in place, the focus block sits inside a protected cognitive environment that has been pre-structured for that exact purpose. The morning sets up the focus. The focus produces the kind of output that builds identity. The identity makes choosing discomfort easier. The discomfort trains the nervous system. The training gives the creation practice more bandwidth. The creation practice generates meaning that motivates the movement. The movement provides the energy that keeps the consistency alive. The consistency compounds all of it. Adding one habit before mastering the previous one is less effective than deepening a single habit until it becomes automatic. This is a counterintuitive insight for someone used to productivity stacks. Most people want to install all 7 at once. They then abandon all 7 within 2 weeks because the cognitive load of managing that many new behaviors overwhelms the available willpower debt. The structural approach is sequential. Install the morning architecture, live with it until it feels automatic. Then add the single focus block. Live with that until it feels automatic. Layer the discomfort ritual and the consistency code next. Then complete the system with reflection, creation, and movement. This is not slower. It is how the brain installs behavior permanently. The 60-day threshold is the practical milestone. Research by Philippa Lally and colleagues at University College London, published in the European Journal of Social Psychology, examined how long it takes for new behaviors to become automatic. The average across the behaviors studied was 66 days. The implication is that you are not building 30-day experiments. You are installing 60-day installations. The first 2 months of any new habit are the most cognitively expensive, and after that, the cost drops because the neural pathway thickens enough to run on autopilot. How these habits look different for different people. The principles are universal, but the specific expressions must be personalized. Your morning architecture may not be Marcus Aurelius's architecture. Your creation practice may not be Benjamin Franklin's creation practice. Your movement practice may not be Aristotle's walking practice. The architecture you install must be one you can sustain in your specific life, with your specific constraints, in your specific body, with your specific schedule. Personalization is not optional. Personalization is the difference between a system you live inside and a system you abandoned on day 19. Benjamin Franklin designed what he called his moral improvement program at age 20. He identified 13 virtues he wanted to cultivate, including temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, and humility. Rather than trying to build all 13 simultaneously, he focused on one per week, cycling through all 13 4 times per year. He kept a small notebook where he tracked each day with a dot when he failed to maintain a virtue. Over time, the number of dots in his notebook decreased as each virtue became more automatic. He applied compound improvement to personal development long before the concept had a name. His biographers credit this systematic habit-building program as the foundation of the extraordinary productivity and effectiveness that characterized the rest of his life. He was not born disciplined. He built discipline through a system, tracked it daily, and let it compound for decades. The truth is that you are not building 7 habits. You are building one identity through 7 daily votes. The identity is what survives. The habits are the mechanism. The system is the architecture. This is where most people stop. They start 7 habits and stop 7 habits at roughly the same time because they never understood the system. They were running 7 interruptions rather than one architecture. Chapter 10. Your 30-Day Rewiring Blueprint. Everything in this audiobook means nothing if it stays in the realm of understanding rather than moving into the realm of action. This final chapter is not philosophy. It is a practical 30-day roadmap for applying all 7 habits, beginning from wherever you are today, without requiring perfection, large time blocks, or ideal conditions. Week 1. One habit only. The morning architecture. This is the foundation that makes every other habit easier to build. You are not aiming for the elaborate 90-minute morning of the productivity influencers. You are aiming for 2 minutes of stillness, 1 declared intention, and 1 act of physical activation. Same time, same sequence, every single day for 7 days, no exceptions. If you miss a day, the flaw is enough to show up the next day. The 2-day rule starts immediately. Week 2. Add the single focus block, not in addition to a full schedule, but by protecting one existing period from distraction. You are not searching for an empty 120 minutes in a packed calendar. You are taking one 25-minute window you already have access to and protecting it with environmental design. Phone in another room, notifications off, 1 task. 25 minutes, every single day for 7 days. Week 3. Add the discomfort ritual and the consistency code. The discomfort ritual at the start of the day, the consistency code on all 4 previously installed habits, using the 2-day rule as your only non-negotiable. You now have 4 daily practices, and your only job is to never miss 2 days in a row on any of them. That 4-habit minimum is your floor. Everything extra is bonus. Week 4. Add reflection, creation, and movement. These last 3 are the harvest. They become easier because the first 4 have already restructured the day. Reflection in the evening for 3 minutes, 1 line minimum. Creation at the time of day when your cognitive resources are highest, 1 sentence or 1 small output minimum. Movement built into the existing day, 10 minutes minimum. By the end of week 4, you have all 7 habits installed at minimum viable levels, and you have 30 days of evidence that the system works. The 30-day audit. What to look for in your thinking, energy, focus, and emotional stability as evidence that rewiring is occurring. A quiet reduction in reactive decision-making. An increase in the duration you can hold attention on a single task before your mind begins reaching for distraction. A subtle shift in how you experience difficulty, less as threat and more as information. A more consistent waking energy. None of these will feel dramatic in the moment. They will feel like small shifts in how your days are happening. Those small shifts are the evidence. Do not discount them. The sustainable maintenance model. What these habits look like as a long-term practice rather than a 30-day challenge. After the 30-day period, you are not graduating to a more advanced version of the program. You are staying in the program and deepening each habit incrementally. The morning architecture expands slightly in length over months. The focus block expands slightly in duration. The discomfort ritual shifts in intensity. The creation practice expands in scope. Movement becomes more structured. Reflection becomes longer and more specific. Consistency remains the only non-negotiable. 2-day rule, always. Epictetus, born a slave, rose to become one of the most influential philosophers in history. When asked what practical philosophy actually meant in daily life, he described it as nothing more than deciding each morning what kind of person you intended to be that day, and then making each subsequent choice in alignment with that decision. The 30-day blueprint is exactly this: a structured daily commitment to a specific kind of person, repeated often enough and consistently enough that the decision stops being effortful and starts being automatic. You are not trying to transform in 30 days. You are trying to establish the habits that will transform you across every following year. The 30 days are the beginning. The rest of your life is where the compound effect does the work. The truth is that nothing in this chapter matters if you do not act on it tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, before the world demands anything from you, you will sit in stillness for 2 minutes, declare one intention, and engage in one act of physical activation. That is the entire blueprint, reduced to its smallest form. The rest is repetition. You do not have an information problem. You have an architecture problem. You have known most of what is in this audiobook for years. The information has not changed you because information never changes anyone. Architecture changes people. Repetition changes people. Daily choices that vote for a specific kind of self over months and years change people. You are not stuck with the mind you have. You are stuck with the habits you keep. That distinction is the entire audiobook. You have heard about systems that work. You have heard about disciplines that compound. You have heard about identity built through repetition rather than intention. Now you must decide whether you will install these systems or whether you will let them remain content you once heard. The 7 habits will not change your life in 30 days. They will change the trajectory of your life across the next decade. That is the real promise. The 30 days are the beginning. The compound effect is what comes after. Do not negotiate with the 2-day rule. Do not wait for motivation to install the morning architecture. Do not confuse consumption with creation. Do not separate the body from the mind. Do not stop showing up on the days when showing up is hard. You are not the person you were yesterday. The person you were yesterday was the product of the habits you were running. The person you will be tomorrow will be the product of the habits you install today. Choose the identity you want. Install the daily vote for that identity. Repeat the vote long enough that the identity stops being a project and starts being who you are. That is what rewiring your mind permanently means. It does not mean perfection. It does not mean dramatic transformation. It means daily micro-decisions, repeated often enough that the direction of your brain changes. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. The neuroscience confirmed it. The only question remaining is whether you will do the work. Every promise you have ever broken to yourself can be replaced by a promise you keep. Every pattern that has been automating the wrong behavior can be replaced by a pattern that automates the right one. The cost is repetition. The cost is daily attendance. The cost is showing up on the days when showing up is the last thing you feel like doing. That cost is low. The alternative is much, much higher. The alternative is more years of the mind you have today running on autopilot. So tomorrow morning, before the world demands a single thing from you, sit in stillness. Declare one intention. Move the body. Step into the identity you are building. And do it again the day after that. And the day after that. That is the whole audiobook. That is the whole work. That is everything.